In the pursuit of a more peaceful life, Stoicism offers us profound insights into how we can find tranquility, not through the outside world, but by cultivating a sense of calm within. The Stoics recognize that external circumstances, whether fortune or misfortune, are fleeting, unpredictable, and often beyond our control. Instead, they taught that true peace, the kind that endures regardless of life's ups and downs, is something we create internally. It is shaped by our perceptions, our attitudes, and how we respond to the events around us. For the Stoics, peace was a product of mastering one's mind and emotions, of aligning oneself with nature's course rather than resisting it, and of understanding the difference between what we can control and what we cannot. Despite the simplicity of finding inner calm, we often fall into habits that quietly disrupt our peace. These small, seemingly harmless patterns of thought or behavior, like worry or judgment, accumulate over time, creating obstacles to a tranquil life. Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus taught that true peace comes from managing our internal reactions, not controlling external events. When we fail to notice these subtle habits, we become trapped by anxiety and frustration. However, by recognizing and dismantling them, we open the door to lasting peace. Stoicism calls for self-examination, reminding us that peace comes from within by focusing on what we can control, our thoughts, choices, and actions, regardless of external circumstances. To do this, we must first identify the subtle habits that disrupt our tranquility. These are the habits that seem small, even trivial, but that can accumulate over time, gnawing at our sense of well-being. They are often rooted in how we think about the world, how we interpret events, and how we allow our emotions to respond to those interpretations. The Stoics would have us ask ourselves, are we too quick to judge others? Do we spend too much time dwelling on what might go wrong? Are we holding on to past grievances, or are we constantly chasing approval and validation from those around us? Once these habits are identified, the next step is to consciously work to remove them, not in a way that forces us into rigidity or harsh self-discipline, but with the understanding that by letting go of these habits, we make room for greater peace. The process is gradual and requires patience, but the reward, a mind that remains calm, focused, and free from unnecessary burdens, is immeasurable. By turning inward and addressing these subtle habits, we transform not only how we experience the world, but also how we engage with it. We become less reactive, more thoughtful, and more at ease with the natural ebb and flow of life. Through the wisdom of Stoicism, we learn that peace is not a distant goal to be reached someday, but a state of being that is available to us here and now, if only we are willing to clear away the mental clutter that stands in its way. Overthinking is one of the most pervasive habits that steals away our peace without us even realizing it. In Stoicism, the mind is considered a powerful tool, but when left unchecked, it can become our greatest enemy. Overthinking traps us in an endless loop of worries, doubts, and imagined scenarios that often never come to pass. The Stoic philosophers, particularly Marcus Aurelius, understood this well. His advice, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength," serves as a reminder that peace is not found in trying to control every external event, but in controlling how we react to those events. What happens when we overthink? We become entangled in hypothetical futures or dwell excessively on the past. The present moment, where life actually happens, is neglected as the mind spirals through endless possibilities, many of which are outside of our control. The Stoics believed in the power of living in the present and focusing on what is directly in front of us, rather than allowing ourselves to be distracted by things that may never come to be. They understood that much of what we fear or anticipate is mere illusion. In reality, life is simpler than we make it out to be. One of the core teachings of Stoicism is the distinction between what is within our control and what is not. Overthinking usually stems from a deep desire to control every outcome, to avoid uncertainty, and to anticipate all potential problems. But Stoicism teaches us that trying to control the uncontrollable is the root of much of our anxiety. Epictetus famously said, "Some things are in our control and others are not." This simple truth forms the foundation of a Stoic's approach to life. By focusing only on what is within our sphere of influence, our thoughts, actions, and responses, we can free ourselves from the paralysis of overthinking. For example, consider a situation where you are waiting for an important decision, perhaps a job offer or the outcome of a project. The natural tendency for many is to obsess over what might happen. What if I don't get the job? What if I made a mistake in the project? These thoughts can spiral into countless what-ifs, causing stress, sleepless nights, and unnecessary anxiety. But what does overthinking actually accomplish? It doesn't change the outcome, and in fact, it often makes us feel worse. A Stoic approach to this situation would be to accept that the outcome is out of your hands. You've done what you can, and now the rest is beyond your control. There's peace in that acceptance, a peace that comes from releasing the need to predict or influence every aspect of life. Another dimension of overthinking is the way it often distorts reality. When we overthink, we tend to exaggerate problems, creating mountains out of molehills. What may have been a small concern becomes in our minds a catastrophe waiting to happen. Stoicism teaches us to step back and view things from a rational perspective, to evaluate situations as they are, not as we imagine them to be. This practice, known as objective judgment, is central to Stoic thinking. Marcus Aurelius would often remind himself to see things as they truly are, not as they appear through the lens of fear or anxiety. Moreover, overthinking can prevent us from taking action. The more we ruminate on a problem, the harder it becomes to move forward. We become stuck in analysis paralysis, unable to decide or act because our mind is overwhelmed with possibilities and doubts. Stoicism emphasizes the importance of action, taking steps toward what is within your control, rather than getting lost in endless contemplation. As Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." In other words, live the philosophy, don't just think about it. Overthinking keeps us in a state of mental limbo, but Stoicism encourages decisive action rooted in wisdom and reason. In practical terms, combating overthinking through Stoicism can involve several mental exercises. One technique is the view from above, where you imagine yourself looking down on your life and the world from a higher perspective. This practice helps to put your worries into perspective, reminding you that in the grand scheme of things, many of the issues we obsess over are insignificant. Another exercise is to remind yourself, as the Stoics did, that the present moment is all we truly have. Instead of letting your mind wander into future uncertainties or past regrets, anchor yourself in the now and ask, what is within my control at this moment? The Stoics also practiced premeditatio malorum, or the premeditation of evils. This involves calmly considering potential challenges or setbacks in advance, not to dwell on them, but to prepare the mind to handle them with resilience if they arise. By doing so, overthinking loses its power because we've already accepted that difficulties may come, and we've mentally rehearsed how we will handle them. This practice trains the mind to remain composed and rational rather than spiraling into anxious over-analysis when problems arise. The habit of chasing approval from others is a deeply ingrained tendency that many of us have developed, often without even realizing it. In Stoicism, this desire for external validation is seen as one of the key obstacles to achieving inner peace and true freedom. The more we seek approval from others, the more we allow our happiness and sense of self-worth to depend on factors outside our control, factors that can change in an instant and over which we have no influence. The Stoics believed that true tranquility comes not from external praise or recognition, but from living in harmony with one's own values and principles. When we chase approval, we hand over our power to others. Our self-esteem becomes tied to how others perceive us, and we start adjusting our behavior to meet their expectations, whether or not those expectations align with who we truly are. This creates a constant sense of tension as we strive to maintain an image or persona that pleases others rather than focusing on our own growth and authenticity. In his writings, Marcus Aurelius reflected on this, urging himself not to be swayed by the opinions of others. It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own. This paradox that Marcus highlights is one of the core issues with seeking approval. It distances us from ourselves. When we prioritize others' opinions over our own judgment, we lose touch with our internal compass. Instead of living according to our own reasoned choices, we are constantly adjusting, shifting, and changing based on what we think will win others' favor. And the harsh truth is, no matter how hard we try, we can never fully control how others perceive us. People's opinions are shaped by their own experiences, biases, and emotions, often having little to do with who we actually are. Chasing their approval, therefore, becomes an exhausting and fruitless endeavor. A key problem with seeking approval is that it often leads to inauthenticity. When we chase the approval of others, we start acting in ways that are not true to who we are. We may suppress our real thoughts, opinions, or desires in order to fit into the mold of what we think others expect of us. Over time, this can create a deep sense of dissatisfaction and disconnection from ourselves. We might achieve some level of external success or social validation, but inside we feel empty because we've abandoned our true selves in the process. The Stoics teach us that living authentically, in accordance with our own values and reason, is far more fulfilling than gaining temporary approval from others. Another downside to chasing approval is that it breeds anxiety. When we base our happiness on external validation, we live in a state of constant uncertainty. Will people like us? Will they praise our efforts? Will they recognize our worth? This creates a never-ending cycle of worry and insecurity as we continually seek reassurance from the outside world. But the Stoic perspective urges us to shift our focus inward, to find contentment in living a life of virtue and doing what we know to be right, regardless of how others respond. The need for approval is also tied to the fear of rejection, which can cause us to avoid taking risks or standing up for what we believe in. We might shy away from pursuing our true goals or passions out of fear that others will disapprove or criticize us. But Stoicism encourages courage and resilience in the face of such fears. The Stoics remind us that our worth does not diminish because someone else fails to recognize it. In fact, Epictetus advises that we should train ourselves to become indifferent to praise and blame alike, focusing instead on the virtue of our actions and the integrity of our character. When we free ourselves from the need for approval, we open the door to true freedom. We no longer have to conform to others' expectations or live in fear of their judgment. We can express ourselves fully and authentically, knowing that our value comes from within, from how we live according to our principles, not from the validation of others. This shift in perspective can bring immense peace because it releases us from the constant pressure to perform for an audience that may never fully appreciate us. The Stoics also recognized that chasing approval can prevent us from forming genuine relationships. When we are overly concerned with how others see us, we are less likely to be vulnerable or honest. We may put up a facade, trying to appear perfect or flawless, which creates a barrier between us and others. True connection comes from being authentic, from sharing our real thoughts, feelings, and experiences, not from trying to be what we think others want us to be. By letting go of the need for approval, we allow ourselves to build deeper, more meaningful relationships based on mutual respect and understanding. In Stoicism, the focus is always on what we can control, and the opinions of others are not something we can control. What we can control is how we respond to those opinions, how we conduct ourselves, and whether or not we let the judgments of others influence our sense of self-worth. The practice of Stoicism teaches us to develop a firm and grounded sense of self, one that is not swayed by the changing tides of external approval. This inner strength allows us to live with greater peace, clarity, and purpose. By recognizing the futility of chasing approval and redirecting our energy toward living a life of virtue, we can free ourselves from the burden of constantly seeking validation. In doing so, we cultivate a deep and lasting sense of peace, one that comes from within and is not dependent on the opinions of others. This is the kind of peace that the Stoics believed to be the foundation of a truly fulfilled life. Holding grudges is a habit that quietly corrodes our inner peace. It's easy to fall into the trap of resentment when we feel wronged, whether by a friend, a colleague, or even a stranger. In Stoicism, harboring grudges is seen as a significant barrier to tranquility because it keeps us tied to past events, unable to move forward. The Stoic philosophers understood that clinging to anger or resentment doesn't punish the person who wronged us, it only prolongs our own suffering. Instead of holding on to grudges, Stoicism encourages us to practice forgiveness, letting go of the past, and accepting that human imperfection is inevitable. One of the core reasons holding a grudge is so harmful is that it consumes valuable mental and emotional energy. When we focus on what someone did to hurt us, we invest our time and thoughts into something that we cannot change, the past. The Stoics would argue that this is a waste of our mental resources, which could be better used in more productive ways, such as focusing on our own growth, learning from the experience, or simply enjoying the present moment. By holding on to grudges, we allow ourselves to be consumed by events that are already over, dragging the weight of that negativity into the present. Grudges are also often rooted in a desire for justice or revenge. We hold onto them because we feel that the person who wronged us should somehow be held accountable, should face consequences for their actions. But Stoicism teaches us that seeking revenge or retribution is not only unnecessary, but also counterproductive. According to the Stoic view, the universe operates according to its own laws, and it is not our role to play the judge or executioner in other people's lives. As Marcus Aurelius put it, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. In other words, the Stoic response to being wronged is not to seek revenge or harbor resentment, but to rise above the wrongdoing by maintaining our own virtue. The desire for justice, while understandable, is often an illusion in personal relationships. We might believe that if we continue to hold a grudge, we are somehow keeping the other person accountable for their actions. However, in most cases, the person we hold a grudge against may not even be aware of our feelings, or if they are, they may not care. Holding a grudge rarely affects the other person in any meaningful way, but it does affect us. We become trapped in a cycle of negative emotions, reliving the hurt or injustice over and over again. Meanwhile, the other person has likely moved on, unaware or indifferent to our internal struggle. By holding a grudge, we often give more power to the person or event than it deserves. The more we dwell on it, the more significant it becomes in our minds, overshadowing other, more positive aspects of our life. Stoicism teaches us that life is too short and too precious to waste on resentment. Instead, we should focus on what we can control, our own thoughts, our own actions, and our own responses. When we do this, we reclaim our peace and prevent the past from taking up residence in our present. Forgiveness, in the Stoic sense, is not about condoning bad behavior or pretending that wrongs never happened. Instead, it's about releasing ourselves from the hold that those wrongs have over us. It's about understanding that people make mistakes, that we ourselves are imperfect, and that holding on to resentment only harms us in the end. By practicing forgiveness, We free ourselves from the emotional chains of the past and open up space for greater peace and clarity in the present. In a broader sense, Stoicism teaches us to accept the imperfections of human nature. People will make mistakes. Sometimes they will act out of ignorance, selfishness, or malice. This is part of the human condition, and it is unrealistic to expect otherwise. By accepting this reality, we can approach others with greater compassion and understanding, knowing that they, like us, are navigating the challenges of life as best they can. When we hold a grudge, we forget this shared humanity and instead place the other person in a position of unforgivable wrongdoing. But Stoicism encourages us to view all people, even those who have wronged us, through the lens of empathy and reason. Letting go of grudges is not always easy, especially when the hurt feels deep or personal. But through the practice of Stoic principles, focusing on what we can control, viewing situations objectively, and cultivating forgiveness, we can gradually free ourselves from the emotional burden of resentment. As we do, we find that our minds are lighter, our hearts more open, and our sense of peace restored. Attachment to material possessions is one of the most subtle yet pervasive habits that can obstruct our journey to inner peace. In Stoicism, the pursuit of wealth and material goods is seen as a distraction from what truly matters, the cultivation of virtue and wisdom. While material things can offer comfort and convenience, the Stoics remind us that they are fleeting and, more importantly, beyond our control. By becoming attached to these external things, we tie our happiness to something that can be easily lost, stolen, or destroyed, leaving us vulnerable to disappointment and anxiety. The Stoics were not opposed to owning or using material possessions. They recognized that to live in the world, we need certain things: food, shelter, clothing, and tools for daily life. However, they cautioned against becoming emotionally dependent on these possessions. Seneca, one of the most well-known Stoic philosophers, was especially vocal about this. Despite being wealthy himself, Seneca often wrote about the dangers of wealth and the illusion of security that it provides. He said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." This statement perfectly encapsulates the Stoic mindset. True wealth is not measured by the amount of stuff we accumulate, but by our ability to be content with what we have, and by reducing our dependence on external things. One of the core ideas in Stoicism is that material possessions are not inherently good or bad. They are indifferent, meaning they have no impact on our moral character or our ability to live a good life. What matters is how we relate to these possessions. When we become attached to them, when we start to believe that they are essential to our happiness or self-worth, we place ourselves at the mercy of fortune. Material goods can be taken away from us in an instant through theft, natural disaster, or even simple misfortune. If our sense of well-being is tied to those things, then we will suffer whenever they are lost or threatened. This is why the Stoics advocated for a mindset of detachment, which does not mean renouncing all possessions or living in poverty, but rather cultivating an internal attitude that remains unaffected by the presence or absence of material goods. Epictetus taught that we should view all things in our life as temporary, borrowed gifts, not permanent fixtures. He advised that when we use or enjoy something, we should remind ourselves that it is not truly ours to keep. When you are about to take your leave of anything, say to yourself, "I must be content to part with it at any moment." This practice helps to train the mind to let go of the emotional attachment we have to things, so that when they inevitably leave our lives, we are not devastated. The dangers of material attachment go beyond the potential loss of possessions. The desire for more wealth, more luxury, more status through material goods can lead to a never-ending cycle of dissatisfaction. In a consumer-driven society, it's easy to believe that the next new purchase will bring happiness or fulfillment. But as soon as we obtain that new item, the sense of satisfaction is often fleeting, and we find ourselves wanting more. The Stoics recognize this cycle as a trap, one that keeps us focused on external things rather than developing inner contentment. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." By shifting our focus away from accumulating material goods and toward cultivating our inner world, we free ourselves from this cycle of endless desire. Stoicism teaches that true happiness and peace come from within, from our ability to live in harmony with nature, practice virtue, and maintain a sense of gratitude for whatever we have, no matter how much or how little that might be. When we base our happiness on internal factors, our values, our actions, our character, we become less dependent on the ups and downs of fortune, including the acquisition or loss of material goods. Epictetus was particularly clear on this point when he said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." When we simplify our desires, when we learn to be content with what we have and appreciate the simple pleasures of life, we reduce the grip that material attachment has on us. This doesn't mean we should abandon all our possessions, but rather that we should develop an attitude of non-attachment, recognizing that material things are impermanent and that our true well-being does not depend on them. One of the exercises the Stoics often practiced was the premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. This involves mentally rehearsing the loss of things we hold dear, including our material possessions, in order to prepare ourselves for the inevitable changes and losses that life brings. By contemplating the possibility of losing what we have, we reduce the shock and emotional turmoil that might come if those things are actually lost. This practice is not meant to cultivate pessimism, but rather resilience and acceptance. By regularly reminding ourselves that nothing material is permanent, we train our minds to remain calm and steady, even in the face of loss. The Stoics also believed that excessive attachment to material possessions can prevent us from fully living in the present. When we are preoccupied with gaining more wealth or preserving what we already have, we become distracted from the more meaningful aspects of life, our relationships, our personal growth, and our pursuit of wisdom. Material attachment can lead to a kind of mental clutter, where our thoughts are constantly focused on possessions, status, or financial security, rather than on the things that truly bring fulfillment. Stoicism encourages us to clear away this mental clutter and to focus on what is essential for a good life: virtue, wisdom, and integrity. Furthermore, attachment to material possessions often leads to comparisons with others. We measure our success or happiness by looking at what others have, and this can breed feelings of envy, inadequacy, or discontent. Stoicism teaches that comparing ourselves to others based on material wealth is a pointless exercise. True contentment comes from within, not from how we stack up against others in terms of possessions or social status. As Seneca wisely observed, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. By letting go of our attachment to material possessions, we can free ourselves from the constant pursuit of more and find peace in the simplicity of life. Stoicism invites us to appreciate the things we have without becoming dependent on them for our happiness. It teaches us that our worth is not defined by what we own, but by how we live. When we release our grip on material goods, we make space for something far more valuable: inner peace, clarity, and a life centered on what truly matters. Living in the future is a habit that quietly erodes our peace by pulling us out of the present moment where life truly happens. Stoicism teaches us that focusing too much on what may or may not come to pass leads to unnecessary anxiety as we lose sight of what is within our control, our actions and responses in the present. By worrying about the future, we often sacrifice our ability to enjoy the here and now, becoming consumed by fears, uncertainties, or desires that may never materialize. The Stoics remind us that serenity is found in grounding ourselves in the present, letting go of the habit of constantly projecting our minds forward into an unknown future. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, frequently emphasized the importance of staying focused on the present. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." This simple yet powerful reminder encapsulates a core Stoic principle. The present moment is all we truly have. The future is uncertain and to a great extent beyond our control. While it is natural to plan for the future or to think about what lies ahead, the Stoics warned against becoming so preoccupied with what might happen that we forget to live fully in the now. When we focus too much on future outcomes, whether they are hopeful ambitions or worst-case scenarios, we allow our minds to wander into realms of uncertainty, which leads to anxiety, fear, and dissatisfaction. One of the key insights in Stoicism is the understanding that the future is not entirely within our control. We can influence certain outcomes through our actions, but there are always factors beyond our power that can shape the course of events. When we become fixated on the future, we often slip into the habit of trying to predict or control things that we simply cannot. This is where anxiety creeps in, when we believe that our happiness or security depends on events that have not yet happened and that may never happen. The Stoics believed that by releasing this illusion of control, we free ourselves from much of the stress and worry that come with living in the future. Seneca, the Roman Stoic, also recognized the dangers of living for tomorrow instead of embracing today. In his writings, he repeatedly stressed the fleeting nature of time and how easily we squander it by worrying about things that are yet to come. He observed, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." When we allow our minds to dwell in the future, we rob ourselves of the present moment, the only moment in which we can act, experience, and truly live. By worrying about future events or outcomes, we lose the opportunity to engage fully with life as it unfolds before us. The Stoics emphasize the value of presence, the practice of staying mentally and emotionally engaged in the present moment. When we live in the future, we are often anticipating things that may never come to pass. We worry about what might go wrong, we hope for things to happen a certain way, or we plan for scenarios that may never unfold as we imagine them. This creates a disconnect between our mind and the reality of the present. Living in the future is like carrying a heavy mental burden, constantly looking ahead, preparing for what's next, instead of being fully present with what is happening right now. Stoicism offers a way to lighten this burden by encouraging us to focus on what we can control, our actions and thoughts in the present moment. Another reason why living in the future can be so detrimental to peace is that it often leads to a distorted view of reality. The future is full of unknowns, and when we try to anticipate it, our minds tend to focus on extremes, either overly optimistic fantasies or worst-case scenarios. Both extremes can lead to dissatisfaction. If we spend too much time dreaming about a future that is better than our current situation, we may begin to feel discontented with the present, constantly comparing it to an idealized future. On the other hand, if we fixate on potential problems or challenges that may arise, we fill our present with unnecessary fear and anxiety. The Stoics teach us to embrace a more balanced perspective, one that accepts the uncertainties of the future without allowing them to dominate our thoughts. One of the Stoic practices for overcoming the habit of living in the future is to cultivate mindfulness of the present moment. This can be as simple as paying attention to your breath, your surroundings, or the task at hand. Marcus Aurelius would frequently remind himself to return to the present by asking, "Is this necessary?" A question that prompts reflection on whether the thoughts we are entertaining are useful or simply distractions from the present. By redirecting our attention away from future worries and toward the current moment, we can begin to break the habit of mentally escaping into the future and start experiencing life as it unfolds. Another Stoic exercise to combat living in the future is the premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. This practice involves mentally preparing for possible challenges or difficulties that may arise in the future, not to dwell on them or live in fear, but to build resilience. By calmly acknowledging that things may not go according to plan, we reduce the anxiety that often comes from uncertainty. We accept that the future may bring challenges, but we also trust in our ability to handle those challenges when they arrive. This mindset helps us to approach the future with a sense of calm preparedness, rather than anxiety or dread. Additionally, the Stoics remind us that our time is limited. Every moment we spend worrying about the future is a moment lost to the present. The future is not guaranteed. It is a concept that exists only in our minds. What we do have with absolute certainty is this very moment. By embracing this truth, we can shift our focus away from the endless what-ifs of the future and instead immerse ourselves in the here and now, where we have the power to act, to think, and to experience life fully. Living in the future also often leads to procrastination. When we are constantly thinking about what we will do tomorrow or what needs to be done later, we delay taking action in the present. The Stoics, particularly Epictetus, emphasized the importance of taking action now, not waiting for the right moment or a future that may never come. "How long are you going to wait before you demand the best for yourself?" he asked. This reminder urges us to take ownership of the present and to stop postponing our lives for a future that remains uncertain. Judging others is a subtle habit that can erode our peace without us even realizing it. In Stoicism, the tendency to criticize or pass judgment on others is seen as an unnecessary distraction from our own personal growth. It not only disturbs our tranquility, but it also leads us away from the Stoic ideal of focusing on what is within our control, namely our own thoughts, actions, and character. When we judge others, we often do so from a place of assumption and limited understanding, projecting our own values and expectations onto them. The Stoics believed that this habit was not only unproductive, but also harmful to our ability to maintain a clear, calm, and rational mind. One of the most profound teachings from Marcus Aurelius on this subject is his advice to avoid fault-finding with others. In his Meditations, he wrote, "Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following question: what fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize?" This simple reflection brings us back to an essential Stoic principle, that we must first look inward before turning our gaze outward. Often the things we criticize in others are reflections of our own shortcomings, weaknesses, or insecurities. By taking a moment to examine ourselves before judging someone else, we can avoid unnecessary criticism and focus instead on improving our own behavior. Judging others is often rooted in a desire to elevate ourselves by pointing out someone else's flaws or mistakes. This creates a false sense of superiority, which is, in reality, based on a fleeting and fragile sense of self-worth. The Stoics understood that true peace and confidence come from within, not from comparing ourselves to others or putting them down. When we judge others harshly, we are often compensating for our own insecurities or shortcomings. Seneca reminded us of the danger of this when he said, "No man is crushed by misfortune unless he has first been deceived by prosperity." By this, he meant that we often forget our own vulnerabilities when life is going well, leading us to judge others more harshly. But in truth, we are all subject to the same misfortunes, weaknesses, and errors. Recognizing this common humanity can help us develop compassion instead of judgment. Stoicism emphasizes that every individual is shaped by their own experiences, beliefs, and circumstances, many of which we know little or nothing about. When we pass judgment on others, we often do so without full knowledge of their situation or the reasons behind their actions. Epictetus encouraged his students to remember that everyone is doing the best they can with the resources and understanding they have. He said, "What upsets people is not things themselves, but their judgments about things." This applies not only to how we perceive external events, but also to how we perceive others. By acknowledging that we cannot fully understand someone else's life or choices, we can approach others with greater humility and openness. Another key problem with judging others is that it keeps us distracted from our own growth. The Stoics believed that the only thing we should concern ourselves with is our own improvement, working to become better, wiser, and more virtuous. When we spend time criticizing others, we take valuable energy away from this task. Epictetus warned against this tendency when he said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." In other words, instead of focusing on how others fall short, we should focus on living our own lives with integrity and virtue. By embodying the principles we wish to see in the world, we become an example to others without the need for judgment or criticism. One of the most powerful tools the Stoics offer us in overcoming the habit of judging others is the practice of empathy. Empathy allows us to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, to imagine what they might be going through, and to understand that their behavior, no matter how it appears on the surface, is shaped by their unique experiences and struggles. Marcus Aurelius, in his reflections, often reminded himself that people act according to their nature and understanding. Instead of becoming frustrated or judgmental, he would try to see things from their perspective, reminding himself that people rarely act out of malice, but rather from ignorance or confusion. This mindset not only reduces our inclination to judge, but also fosters compassion and understanding. Stoicism also teaches us that judging others can often be a projection of our own inner conflicts. When we are harshly critical of someone else's behavior, it can be a reflection of unresolved issues within ourselves. For example, if we judge someone for being impatient, it may be because we struggle with impatience ourselves and feel uncomfortable seeing that trait in someone else. By recognizing this projection, we can use the opportunity to turn inward and address our own flaws, rather than fixating on someone else's. In a practical sense, overcoming the habit of judging others can begin with small daily practices. One such practice is to pause before making a judgmental remark, whether aloud or in your mind, and ask yourself, do I truly understand this person's situation? What might they be experiencing that I don't see? What can I learn from this situation? These questions help create space for empathy and understanding, allowing us to respond with kindness rather than criticism. Over time, this practice not only reduces judgment, but also deepens our connection with others and cultivates a sense of inner peace. Comparing yourself to others is a habit that subtly poisons your peace of mind and distorts your sense of self-worth. In Stoicism, this comparison is considered not only unnecessary, but also harmful, as it shifts our focus away from what truly matters, our own personal growth and alignment with virtue. The Stoics believed that every individual is on their own unique path, shaped by their circumstances, experiences, and choices. By constantly measuring ourselves against others, we forget this fundamental truth and allow external benchmarks, over which we have no control, to dictate our sense of success and happiness. One of the key reasons why comparing ourselves to others is so damaging is that it places our sense of worth in something external, something we cannot control. We cannot control the talents, resources, or opportunities that others have been given, just as we cannot control the circumstances that shape their lives. The Stoics taught that it is futile to base our happiness on things outside of our control. Epictetus, in particular, emphasized that we should only concern ourselves with what is within our own power, our thoughts, actions, and choices. By comparing ourselves to others, we give away our peace by focusing on things that are beyond our influence, rather than cultivating contentment with what we have and who we are. Moreover, comparisons often lead to feelings of envy, jealousy, and resentment, emotions that the Stoics saw as destructive and irrational. When we compare ourselves to others, we may feel envious of their success or resentful that we have not achieved the same. These emotions can cloud our judgment and prevent us from seeing the blessings in our own lives. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." By allowing our thoughts to be consumed by comparisons and envy, we diminish our ability to find joy in our own experiences and achievements. Instead of appreciating what we have, we focus on what we lack in comparison to others, creating a sense of dissatisfaction and discontent. Another issue with comparing ourselves to others is that it distracts us from our own personal journey. In Stoicism, the goal is not to outdo others, but to constantly strive to improve ourselves, to live with virtue, wisdom, and integrity. When we compare ourselves to others, we often lose sight of our own progress because we are measuring ourselves against someone else's life, which may be entirely different from ours. This external focus can cause us to neglect our own growth as we become fixated on trying to meet societal expectations or match the achievements of those around us. Epictetus wisely counseled, "Progress is not achieved by luck or accident, but by working on yourself daily." The true measure of success, according to Stoicism, is not how we compare to others, but how we compare to who we were yesterday. Comparisons are often based on incomplete information. When we look at others, we usually see only a small, curated part of their lives, their accomplishments, their outward appearance, or their material success. We rarely see the struggles, sacrifices, or inner turmoil that might be hidden behind the surface. As a result, comparisons are often misleading. We may envy someone's wealth without realizing the personal costs they have paid for it, or we may admire someone's public success without knowing the challenges they face in their private life. The Stoics taught that we should avoid making judgments based on appearances, as they are often deceptive. Instead, we should focus on understanding our own lives in depth and striving to live according to our own principles. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to stay grounded in his own reality and not to be distracted by what others were doing. He wrote, "It is not the weight of the future or the past that oppresses you, but always the present alone." This advice applies to comparison as well. We can waste valuable time and energy comparing ourselves to others, time that could be better spent living in the present and working on our own path. The Stoics believed that each person's journey is unique, and what might seem like success for one person may not bring fulfillment or peace to another. By accepting this, we can release the pressure to compete or keep up with others, and instead focus on what truly matters, our own development and character. In Stoicism, there is also an emphasis on the concept of oikeiosis, the idea that we each have a unique nature, and that our primary task in life is to align ourselves with that nature. This means discovering our own potential, strengths and purpose, and living in accordance with them. When we compare ourselves to others, we risk losing sight of our own nature. We may start to chase goals that aren't truly ours or live according to values that don't resonate with us, simply because we see others doing the same. This detachment from our true selves leads to frustration and dissatisfaction. The Stoics believed that peace comes from living authentically, from aligning our actions and desires with our own internal values, rather than the external expectations set by others. Another way that comparisons undermine peace is that they can lead to a constant feeling of never enough. When we look at others, there will always be someone who is more successful, more talented, or wealthier. If we base our happiness on being better than others, we will always find ourselves falling short because there is no end to the comparisons we can make. This mindset traps us in a cycle of constant striving, where we never feel satisfied with what we have or who we are. Seneca warned against this when he said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." True wealth, in the Stoic sense, comes from contentment with what we have and who we are, not from surpassing others in any external measure. One of the practical ways to overcome the habit of comparing yourself to others is to practice gratitude. The Stoics emphasized the importance of appreciating the present moment and being thankful for what we have, no matter how modest it may be. When we shift our focus from what others have to what we already possess, we begin to see the abundance in our own lives. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself to be grateful for the small blessings in life, the simple joys, the opportunities for learning, and the relationships that bring meaning. By cultivating gratitude, we can break free from the cycle of comparison and find peace in the life we are living right now. Another Stoic practice is to reflect on our own progress rather than comparing ourselves to others. Each day, we can ask ourselves, have I grown wiser? Have I acted with more patience or compassion? Have I made decisions in line with my values? This self-reflection keeps us focused on our own journey and helps us measure success in terms of our personal development rather than external achievements. By taking ownership of our growth, we can stop looking to others for validation and instead find fulfillment in our own progress. Neglecting gratitude is a subtle yet profound habit that can drain our sense of peace and contentment. In Stoicism, gratitude is not merely a pleasant feeling, but a core practice that helps us maintain perspective, appreciate what we have, and remain resilient in the face of adversity. The Stoics understood that the human mind tends to focus on what is missing, what has gone wrong, or what could be better. This natural inclination, if left unchecked, leads to a life of dissatisfaction and constant striving. The remedy, they believed, lies in actively cultivating gratitude for the present moment and for the many blessings, however small, that we often overlook. Gratitude in the Stoic tradition is not about ignoring life's challenges or pretending that everything is perfect. Rather, it is about recognizing the good that exists even amidst difficulty and finding value in the simplest aspects of life. Marcus Aurelius frequently wrote in his meditations about the importance of appreciating the present moment, no matter how imperfect it may seem. He observed, "Do not indulge in dreams of having what you have not, but reckon up the chief of the blessings you do possess, and then thankfully remember how you would crave for them if they were not yours." This quote reflects the Stoic emphasis on appreciating what we already have instead of fixating on what we lack. One of the reasons why neglecting gratitude is so detrimental to inner peace is that it shifts our focus away from the present moment and directs it towards some imagined future where we have more or things are better. This creates a constant sense of longing and dissatisfaction, as we are always waiting for something else to bring us happiness. In contrast, when we practice gratitude, we bring our attention back to the present, where we can find contentment in the here and now. The Stoics believed that peace comes not from external circumstances, but from how we choose to perceive and respond to those circumstances. By practicing gratitude, we train ourselves to see the good in the present, rather than always seeking fulfillment in the future. One of the key practices in Stoicism is the concept of negative visualization, a technique where we imagine the loss of things we currently have in order to better appreciate them. By contemplating the possibility of losing our possessions, relationships, or even life itself, we heighten our awareness of their value and cultivate a deeper sense of gratitude for them in the present. This practice helps counteract the human tendency to take things for granted and allows us to feel thankful for what we often overlook. Epictetus encouraged his students to regularly reflect on the impermanence of life, reminding them that nothing is guaranteed. This perspective does not lead to despair, but rather to a greater appreciation for the present moment and a deeper sense of gratitude for the things we might otherwise neglect. When we neglect gratitude, we also miss out on the opportunity to strengthen our resilience. Life is full of challenges, disappointments, and setbacks, and it can be easy to focus only on what has gone wrong or what we lack. However, the Stoics believed that even in the most difficult circumstances, there is always something to be grateful for. Marcus Aurelius, writing during times of personal and political turmoil, would often remind himself to seek the silver lining in adversity. He saw challenges as opportunities for growth and for practicing virtues like patience, courage, and wisdom. By focusing on what we can learn from hardship, rather than just the pain it brings, we cultivate a sense of gratitude even for life's difficulties. This mindset strengthens our ability to endure tough times with grace and resilience. Gratitude also plays a crucial role in fostering contentment. One of the great obstacles to peace is the constant desire for more success, more wealth, more recognition. This desire is rooted in the belief that happiness lies somewhere outside of ourselves, in the accumulation of external things. But the Stoics understood that true contentment comes from within. Seneca advised, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." When we practice gratitude, we shift our focus from what we lack to what we already have, and we begin to see that we have enough. This realization brings a deep sense of contentment and satisfaction, freeing us from the endless cycle of wanting and striving for more. Another reason why neglecting gratitude undermines peace is that it breeds a sense of entitlement. When we fail to recognize and appreciate the good things in our lives, we start to believe that we are owed certain things, whether it be success, comfort, or recognition. This entitlement leads to frustration and disappointment when life does not meet our expectations. Stoicism, however, teaches us to adopt a mindset of humility and appreciation. Epictetus emphasized that everything we receive in life is a gift, not something we are entitled to. He said, "He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has." By practicing gratitude, we cultivate a sense of humility and learn to view life as a gift, not a set of demands or expectations. Gratitude also fosters a greater connection with others. When we appreciate the people in our lives, whether they are family, friends, colleagues, or even strangers, we strengthen our relationships and cultivate a sense of community. The Stoics placed great importance on the idea of human interconnectedness, believing that we are all part of a larger whole. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on the idea that we are all in this life together, sharing in the same struggles, joys, and experiences. By expressing gratitude for the people in our lives, we build stronger, more supportive relationships and foster a sense of belonging. Neglecting gratitude, on the other hand, leads to isolation and a lack of appreciation for the contributions and presence of others. One practical way to cultivate gratitude is to make it a daily practice. The Stoics were big proponents of reflection, and one way to integrate gratitude into daily life is to take a few moments each day to reflect on what you are thankful for. This could be something as simple as the warmth of the sun, the support of a friend, or the opportunity to learn something new. By actively acknowledging the good in our lives, we train our minds to focus on what we have rather than on what we lack. Over time, this practice shifts our mindset from one of scarcity to one of abundance, creating a deeper sense of peace and fulfillment. Reacting impulsively is a habit that often disrupts our inner peace and clouds our judgment. In Stoicism, the ability to remain calm and deliberate in the face of challenges is seen as essential for maintaining tranquility and clarity of thought. The Stoics understood that when we react impulsively, whether in anger, frustration, fear, or excitement, we are letting external events control our emotions and actions, rather than responding with reason and composure. By learning to pause, reflect, and choose our responses carefully, we can cultivate a sense of control over our minds and emotions, leading to a more peaceful and centered life. One of the central teachings in Stoicism is the idea that external events themselves are not inherently good or bad. It is our reactions to them that determine whether we experience peace or turmoil. As Epictetus famously said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." This highlights the Stoic belief that our emotional responses are within our control, even if the events that trigger them are not. When we react impulsively, we give up this control, allowing fleeting emotions to dictate our actions, often in ways that we later regret. Impulsive reactions are usually fueled by strong emotions like anger, fear, or excitement. These emotions can cloud our judgment, leading us to make decisions that are based on temporary feelings rather than reasoned thought. The Stoics emphasized the importance of emotional discipline, of being able to acknowledge our emotions without being ruled by them. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to remain calm in the face of provocation or frustration, reflecting, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." This advice speaks to the power of staying grounded and composed, even when others act in ways that might provoke an emotional reaction. When we react impulsively, we are often driven by our first instinct, which may not always be the wisest course of action. For example, if someone insults us, our immediate reaction might be to lash out in anger to defend ourselves or to retaliate. However, the Stoics teach that reacting in such a way only escalates the situation and disturbs our own peace of mind. Instead, they encourage us to pause, reflect on the situation, and respond in a way that aligns with our values. Seneca wisely observed, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." This simple practice of delaying our reaction gives us the opportunity to think clearly, consider the consequences of our actions, and choose a more rational, measured response. Reacting impulsively can also lead to regret, as we may say or do things in the heat of the moment that we would not choose to do if we were thinking more clearly. Once the emotional storm has passed, we often realize that our impulsive reactions were not aligned with our true values or long-term goals. In Stoicism, one of the key principles is to act with virtue and wisdom, rather than being swayed by emotions or circumstances. By learning to pause before reacting, we create space for reason and virtue to guide our actions, rather than being swept away by momentary impulses. One of the reasons why impulsive reactions are so harmful is that they often create a ripple effect, leading to more negative consequences and further disturbances to our peace. For example, reacting impulsively in anger can damage relationships, provoke conflict, or lead to actions that we later regret. The Stoics believed that maintaining emotional discipline and responding with thoughtfulness helps to prevent these negative outcomes and allows us to navigate challenges with greater ease and clarity. Epictetus advised, "When you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings. Then you will forget your anger." This practice of self-reflection encourages us to look inward and question whether our emotional reactions are truly justified, rather than reacting impulsively to the faults of others. Another key aspect of impulsive reactions is that they are often driven by our perceptions, which may be inaccurate or incomplete. The Stoics emphasize the importance of objective judgment, of seeing things as they truly are, not as they appear through the lens of emotion. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself to view situations objectively, asking, "What is this really that is making me so upset?" This practice helps to strip away the emotional charge of a situation and allows us to respond with calm, reasoned clarity. When we react impulsively, we often fail to see the full picture, and our responses are based on a narrow, emotion-driven perspective. One of the Stoic practices for overcoming impulsive reactions is to cultivate ataraxia, or a state of inner calm and tranquility. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or becoming indifferent to the world, but rather developing the ability to remain composed and unshaken in the face of external events. By practicing mindfulness and staying present in the moment, we can become more aware of our emotional triggers and learn to pause before reacting. This allows us to engage with the world from a place of calm, rather than being constantly buffeted by emotional highs and lows. In Stoicism, the concept of apatheia, freedom from destructive emotions is closely related to the idea of emotional discipline. The Stoics recognize that emotions themselves are not inherently bad, but when they lead to impulsive actions, they can become destructive. By developing apatheia, we train ourselves to experience emotions without being ruled by them. This practice allows us to respond to situations with calm deliberation, rather than impulsively reacting out of anger, fear, or excitement. Over time, this ability to maintain emotional equilibrium leads to a deeper sense of peace and resilience in the face of life's challenges. Another technique the Stoics employed to prevent impulsive reactions is the practice of premeditation, or premeditatio malorum. This involves mentally rehearsing potential challenges or difficulties before they arise, so that when they do occur, we are not caught off guard or overwhelmed by emotion. By preparing ourselves in advance for life's inevitable difficulties, we can respond to them with greater calm and clarity, rather than reacting impulsively out of shock or surprise. This practice helps us cultivate a mindset of readiness and acceptance, reducing the likelihood of emotional overreactions when things don't go as planned. Practicing patience is another key Stoic virtue that helps counter impulsive reactions. Patience allows us to endure discomfort, frustration, or uncertainty without feeling the need to react immediately. When we cultivate patience, we create space for reflection and reason to guide our actions. Seneca, in his writings on anger, emphasized that patience is a powerful antidote to impulsive reactions. He wrote, "No man can have a peaceful life who thinks too much about lengthening it, or believes that living through many consulships is a great blessing. Rehearse to yourself that this day brings the end of all things." This perspective helps us remember that impulsive reactions often come from an inflated sense of urgency, when in reality, we have the time to pause, think, and choose our actions wisely. Seeking constant stimulation is a habit that modern life often encourages, but from a Stoic perspective, it disrupts our peace, focus, and connection to what truly matters. In today's world, we are surrounded by endless distractions, social media, entertainment, notifications, and the constant stream of information available at our fingertips. While these sources of stimulation can provide temporary relief from boredom or discomfort, Stoicism teaches that constantly seeking external stimulation prevents us from developing the inner stillness and contentment necessary for a peaceful life. True tranquility, the Stoics believed, comes not from filling our minds with endless noise, but from cultivating a sense of calm and presence within ourselves. One of the core tenets of Stoicism is that peace is found within, not in external circumstances or distractions. The more we seek stimulation from the outside world, the more we lose touch with our inner selves, relying on external sources of excitement, pleasure, or distraction to keep us entertained or engaged. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about the importance of cultivating inner stillness, reminding himself that the constant pursuit of external things, whether they be material goods, pleasure, or stimulation, leads to a restless mind. In his meditations, he reflected, "People look for retreats for themselves, in the country, by the coast, or in the hills. But nowhere can a person find a retreat more peaceful or trouble-free than in his own mind." This Stoic wisdom highlights the value of turning inward rather than outward for true peace. When we become dependent on constant stimulation, we lose the ability to sit with ourselves, to be present in the moment without needing something to distract us. This habit leads to a restless mind, always seeking the next source of excitement or novelty. The Stoics, however, believed that tranquility comes from simplicity and focus. They encouraged a life of moderation and mindfulness, where we are fully engaged with what is in front of us, without being pulled in 1,000 different directions by distractions. Seneca warned about the dangers of overstimulation, writing, "You must live for your own sake. This is not selfishness, but the opposite of selfishness. To live for oneself is to live for all. By this he meant that we must cultivate our inner resources rather than relying on external distractions to fill our time or give us a sense of purpose. Constant stimulation can also lead to a scattered mind, one that is unable to concentrate or focus on what truly matters. When we are always jumping from one distraction to the next, whether it's checking our phones, consuming media, or seeking out new experiences, we lose the ability to focus on deeper, more meaningful pursuits. Stoicism teaches us that true fulfillment comes from engaging deeply with our lives, from focusing on the things that contribute to our growth and well-being, rather than being constantly pulled away by fleeting pleasures or distractions. Epictetus emphasized this idea, saying, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." This means that in order to grow, we must sometimes step away from the crowd, from the noise, and focus inward on what truly matters, even if that means resisting the allure of constant stimulation. Another downside to seeking constant stimulation is that it can numb us to the richness of life's quieter moments. The Stoics valued the simple pleasures of life, moments of reflection, solitude, and connection with nature or others. When we are always chasing the next exciting thing, we often overlook these smaller, quieter experiences that can bring deep joy and contentment. By filling every moment with distraction, we miss the opportunity to appreciate the beauty of stillness, the joy of deep conversation, or the satisfaction of a job well done. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself frequently to return to the present moment, to appreciate the simplicity of life, and to avoid being swept away by external distractions. He wrote, "The present moment is all we ever have. Live in it fully." This Stoic wisdom encourages us to resist the habit of seeking stimulation and to find peace in the simplicity of the here and now. Constant stimulation also prevents us from developing patience and endurance, qualities the Stoics held in high regard. When we are accustomed to instant gratification, whether through technology, entertainment, or social media, we lose the ability to sit with discomfort or boredom. However, the Stoics believed that facing discomfort head-on is essential for developing resilience and strength of character. Seneca wrote extensively about the value of enduring hardship and discomfort, viewing it as a path to personal growth and inner peace. He said, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. By constantly seeking stimulation, we avoid the challenges that could help us grow and develop a deeper sense of peace." One of the ways the Stoics encouraged overcoming the habit of seeking constant stimulation is through the practice of mindfulness and presence. When we train ourselves to be fully present in whatever we are doing, we break the cycle of distraction and bring our attention back to the moment. Whether it is a simple task like washing the dishes, taking a walk, or having a conversation, the Stoics believed that by giving our full attention to the task at hand, we can find peace and fulfillment. This practice of mindfulness helps us to focus on what is essential rather than being swept away by the constant pull of stimulation. The fear of death is one of the most primal and deep-rooted fears that many people experience, and it can significantly disrupt our inner peace. In Stoicism, this fear is seen as irrational and a major obstacle to living a full and meaningful life. The Stoics believed that by confronting and accepting the inevitability of death, we can free ourselves from the anxiety it causes and live more fully in the present. Instead of avoiding thoughts of death or fearing it, the Stoics encouraged embracing it as a natural part of life, something that can even guide us to live more virtuously and with greater purpose. One of the most famous Stoic meditations on death comes from Marcus Aurelius, who frequently reminded himself of the impermanence of life. He wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." This statement encapsulates the Stoic perspective that fearing death is misplaced because death is inevitable and beyond our control. What we should concern ourselves with, according to the Stoics, is how we live our lives in the time we have. Instead of letting the fear of death paralyze us or cause anxiety, we should let it motivate us to live with intention, to focus on what truly matters, and to act with virtue. The Stoics believed that much of the fear surrounding death comes from a misunderstanding of what death really is. Epictetus taught that death is simply a return to the natural order, something that happens to all living things. Why should we fear that which is bound to happen to everyone, he asked. To the Stoics, death is not something to be feared or avoided, but something to be accepted as part of the natural cycle of life. By accepting this reality, we free ourselves from the dread and anxiety that often accompany thoughts of death. When we come to terms with our mortality, we are able to focus more fully on living in accordance with our values, rather than worrying about the inevitable end. The fear of death often stems from the unknown, what happens after we die. Stoicism, however, teaches us to focus only on what we can know and what is within our control. Speculating about what lies beyond death is futile, because it is something we cannot control or fully understand. Instead of wasting time on these speculations, the Stoics advise us to focus on what we do know, that we have this life right now, and it is up to us to live it well. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." This reminder encourages us to live with urgency and purpose, knowing that death is always close, but not letting it dominate our thoughts or actions. Another important aspect of Stoic philosophy is the practice of memento mori, or the reflection on mortality. The Stoics believed that regularly contemplating death helps to remove the fear of it and keeps us grounded in the present. By reminding ourselves that life is finite, we can better appreciate the time we have and use it wisely. This practice is not meant to induce fear, but to reduce the power that the fear of death holds over us. Epictetus advised his students to think of death as a natural and inevitable event, not something to dread, but something to acknowledge and accept. This mindset frees us from the anxiety of trying to avoid or deny death and allows us to focus on living fully and mindfully. Fear of death can also lead to a constant preoccupation with avoiding risks or seeking security, which can prevent us from fully engaging with life. The Stoics believed that living in fear of death or any other unavoidable outcome leads to a kind of paralysis, where we are so focused on preserving life that we forget to actually live. Seneca warned against this mindset, saying, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." By constantly fearing death, we waste precious time that could be spent pursuing meaningful goals, deepening relationships, or practicing virtue. Instead of being consumed by fear, the Stoics urge us to accept the uncertainty of life and focus on making the most of the time we have. Moreover, the Stoics viewed death as a natural event, something that should not be viewed as a punishment or a tragedy, but simply as part of the order of the universe. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on the fact that all things must come to an end, from the smallest creatures to the greatest empires. By understanding that death is a universal experience shared by all living beings, we can begin to see it not as something to fear, but as something that connects us to the natural world. This perspective helps us to feel at peace with our mortality, knowing that we are part of a larger cycle of life and death. Another reason why the fear of death can be so disruptive is that it often causes us to cling to things that are temporary. Material possessions, status, or even our own bodies. The Stoics taught that everything in life is impermanent, and the sooner we accept this, the more peace we can find. Epictetus encouraged his students to view all things, including their own lives, as temporary and borrowed. When you kiss your child, say to yourself, "Tomorrow it may die." While this may seem harsh, it is a reminder to cherish the people and experiences we have while they are with us, without becoming overly attached to them. By accepting the impermanence of life, we free ourselves from the fear of losing what we have and instead appreciate each moment for what it is. Stoicism also encourages us to focus on what we leave behind after we die. Instead of fearing death, the Stoics believed we should focus on the legacy of our actions, our character, and the impact we have on the world. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on the idea that death is not the end of our influence. What matters most is how we live while we are here, whether we contribute to the betterment of others, whether we act with integrity and virtue, and whether we leave the world a little better than we found it. By focusing on our legacy, rather than fearing the moment of death itself, we can shift our attention to living a life that is meaningful and purposeful. In practical terms, overcoming the fear of death involves cultivating a mindset of acceptance and gratitude. Instead of fearing the unknown, we can train ourselves to appreciate each day as a gift and to live in accordance with our values. The Stoics encourage daily reflection on death, not as a way to become morbid or fearful, but as a way to remind ourselves to make the most of the time we have. By regularly contemplating our mortality, we become less afraid of it and more focused on living with purpose and intention. In conclusion, these 11 subtle habits, overthinking, chasing approval, holding grudges, attachment to material possessions, living in the future, judging others, comparing yourself to others, neglecting gratitude, reacting impulsively, seeking constant stimulation, and fearing death, are all barriers to the inner peace and tranquility that Stoicism teaches us to cultivate. By identifying and gradually removing these habits, we can align ourselves more closely with Stoic principles, leading to a life of greater clarity, contentment, and purpose. The Stoics remind us that true peace comes from within, from how we choose to think and act, not from external circumstances. Each habit we let go of brings us closer to a state of resilience and calm, allowing us to navigate life's challenges with wisdom and grace. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insights on Stoicism and living a peaceful, purpose-driven life. Thank you for watching.